They put the papers on my kitchen table like they were doing me a favor. My daughter had arranged them in a neat stack, edges aligned, a pen placed on top at a precise angle. My son-in-law stood near the window with his arms crossed, not looking at me, looking at the yard. He had always looked at my yard, the way people look at things they are already planning to change. "It's the right move, Mom," my daughter said. She sat down across from me and folded her hands. Clearwater Gardens is lovely. We toured it last week. There's a sunroom. I looked at the papers. I did not pick up the pen. "I need time to read them," I said. "We've been through all of this," my son-in-law said, still looking at the yard. "The mortgage on the new house closes in 6 weeks. We need the capital." There it was. Capital. Not my home of 31 years. Not the place where I had raised my daughter, where my husband Gerald had built the back porch with his own hands and painted it white twice a year because he said white always looked like it meant something. Capital. I was 68 years old. I was not confused. I was not fragile. I had taught high school English for 34 years, and I had buried my husband 4 years ago, and I had done both of those things without falling apart, and I was not going to fall apart now. But I picked up the pen and I signed. And when the real estate agent came 3 weeks later with the buyer and the closing documents, the notary opened her folder and read aloud what I had done, and my son-in-law's face went a color I had never seen on a living person. That is where I want to start. That is the part I have been thinking about telling someone for a long time. Gerald and I bought the house in 1993. It was March, and the yard was bare, and the woman selling it had left a pot of tulips on the front step, as though she knew we needed convincing. We did not need convincing. I stood in the empty living room and felt the particular quiet of a place that has been loved and is waiting to be loved again. And I told Gerald that this was it. He said he knew. He always said he knew, even when he was just agreeing with me, and I loved him for that. We were not wealthy. Gerald taught shop class at the middle school. I had my English classes, my red pen, my stacks of essays about books that 14-year-olds didn't always want to read, but sometimes, when the right one landed in the right hands, genuinely did. We saved carefully. We took 1 vacation a year, always driving distance, always somewhere with water, a lake, the coast, once a houseboat on a river in Tennessee that my daughter, who was 9 at the time, declared the greatest adventure of her life. My daughter's name is Patricia. Everyone calls her Trish. She was a sweet child. I say that not to be cruel, but because it is true, and because what came later confused me for a long time, and I had to keep reminding myself that she was once genuinely sweet, curious, soft-hearted, the kind of girl who rescued earthworms from the sidewalk after rain. Somewhere in her 30s, she married a man named Dale, and Dale had opinions about everything, including what to do with old people and their assets. And gradually, those opinions became her opinions too. The way one river swallows another, until you forget there were ever two. Gerald died in the spring 4 years ago. A Tuesday in April. He had been sick for 8 months, and we had known more or less how it would go. And still, it arrived like something no one had predicted. I sat in the house for 2 weeks after the funeral and did not move much. My neighbor Helen brought food. My former student Rosalie, who was now in her 40s and had become a true friend, came and sat with me in the evenings without feeling the need to fill the silence. Those were the people who helped me. Trish came once, stayed 3 hours, cried more than I did, and said she just couldn't bear to see the house like this, meaning she could not bear her own feelings, and then she went home to Dale and her new neighborhood with the houses that all looked like each other. After those 2 weeks I got up, and I kept going. That is what you do. Or at least it is what I did. Gerald had left a will. Everything came to me. Simply and cleanly. The way he had done most things. The house was mine. The savings were modest. The pension was mine as long as I lived. I was not rich, but I was steady, and I owned my home, and I had my garden, and I had Helen next door, and Rosalie on Wednesday evenings, and I had my books. I was fine. I told everyone I was fine, and unlike most times people say that, I actually meant it. Then, Dale lost his job. Or rather, Dale left his job, which he described as losing it, and began talking about opportunities and investments and the way that real wealth was built through real property, and within a year, he and Trish had decided to buy a larger house in a neighborhood 40 minutes away. A house that was, by any reasonable measure, more house than they needed or could currently afford. I did not say this. I am saying it now. But I did not say it then. What I said, when Trish called to tell me about the plan, was that I was happy for her. If she was happy. She said she was very happy. She said the school district was excellent. Their sons were 4 and 7, and she had already been thinking about school districts for years in the specific, urgent way that she had inherited from Dale, who believed that preparation was the difference between people who succeeded and people who did not. She did not ask for anything on that call. That came later. The first conversation happened at Sunday dinner. I cooked, because I always cooked when they came. Because that had always been what we did, and I saw no reason to change it. Pot roast, Gerald's mother's recipe, the one with the carrots and the 2 cups of red wine that my grandsons found endlessly fascinating. I set the table. I lit a candle. I put the boys' places at the corners where they liked to sit. Trish helped me clear the plates, and that was when Dale said, from the dining room, in the carrying voice he used when he wanted to seem casual about something important that he had been thinking. About the house, he said. Trish stopped moving. I kept moving. I carried the plates to the sink and set them down and dried my hands on the dish towel that had hung on the same hook for 20 years. What about the house? I said. He came to the doorway. He had a way of filling doorways that I had never liked. It's a lot of space for one person, he said. And the market right now, especially this neighborhood. He shook his head in a way meant to convey that the market was almost too good to ignore. It would set you up very comfortably. Clearwater Gardens, over on Elm. It's really not what you'd expect. Very active community. Trish and I looked at it and thought, you looked at it, I said. Just to have information, Trish said quickly. Just to know what the options were. For me, I said. Mom. She turned to face me. Her face had the expression she used when she was asking me to be reasonable, which was a face that her father had never once made and which she had, I suspected, learned from Dale. It's a big decision, and we want to help you make it well. You're not getting younger. The upkeep alone. I manage the upkeep, I said. With help from Helen, Dale said, who is also 69. That was the first conversation. It ended without resolution, as first conversations like that always do. They took the boys home. I washed the dishes and put them away, and stood in the kitchen in the quiet for a long time, and then I went to the back porch and sat in the dark and looked at the yard. Gerald's porch. Gerald's yard. The rose bushes he had planted along the fence, because I had mentioned once, in 1997, that I liked roses. I sat there until the cold made it impractical, and then I went to bed. There were more conversations. 3 over the following 2 months. Each one more organized than the last, as though Dale had been reading about negotiation technique and applying what he learned. He brought printed materials about Clearwater Gardens. He brought a market analysis from a real estate agent, a friend of his, it turned out, which I noted and filed away. He talked about equity and liquidity and quality of life in that order, as though equity and liquidity were the foundation upon which quality of life was necessarily built. Trish said less as the conversations went on. I watched her. I am good at watching people. 34 years of watching teenagers will do that. and what I saw in my daughter's face was not cruelty. It was something more ordinary and in some ways harder to accept. She had simply decided that Dale was probably right. She had decided it the way people decide things when they are tired, and someone confident is standing next to them, and having decided it, she had closed the part of her mind that would have told her how this felt from where I was sitting. That part of her mind used to rescue earthworms. After the third conversation, I told them I would think about it. Dale smiled in a way that suggested thinking about it was merely the formality before the inevitable conclusion. I smiled back in a way that I hoped revealed nothing. I called Rosalie that evening. I told her everything in the order it had happened, and she listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I valued most about her. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "What do you want to do?" she said. "I want to stay in my house," I said. "Then let's find out what your options are." Rosalie had, in her professional life, worked in a law firm for 12 years before moving on to other things, and while she was not a lawyer herself, she knew how to find one, and 2 days later I was sitting across from a woman named Carol in a small office downtown that smelled like coffee and old files and something piney that might have been a candle. Carol was perhaps 50, with reading glasses she wore on a chain, and a direct manner that I found immediately comfortable. She did not speak to me as though I was confused. She did not preface her sentences with assurances about how this was all very normal or not to worry. She simply asked me to tell her the situation, and then she listened in the focused way of someone who is organizing information while receiving it. When I finished, she said, "Has anyone established any legal authority over your finances or decisions?" I said no. "Has your daughter or her husband asked you to sign any power of attorney documents?" I said not yet, but Dale had mentioned it. She nodded. She made a note. "The house is in your name alone?" "Since Gerald passed, yes." "And his estate has been fully settled?" "2 years ago." She put down her pen. "Here is what I want you to understand," she said. "You are not obligated to do anything. No one has legal authority to require you to sell your home or to move anywhere. The conversations you've been having, whatever their tone, have no legal weight whatsoever. Your home is your property." I knew this, and yet hearing it said plainly, by a professional, in that small room that smelled like coffee and pine, made something in my chest loosen that I had not known was tightened. "However," Carol said, and she picked up the pen again, "if your goal is simply to refuse, that is straightforward. But if your goal is to protect your assets from this kind of pressure long-term for your own sake, and possibly for your grandchildren's refusal alone may not be your most durable option." I looked at her. "Tell me about the revocable living trust," I said. She smiled. "We met 3 times over the following 3 weeks. I did not tell Trish or Dale. I did not tell Helen, because Helen was a wonderful neighbor and a kind friend and a committed sharer of information with everyone she knew. I told no one except Rosalie, who came with me to the second meeting and asked questions I would not have thought to ask. What I came to understand, over those 3 meetings, was this. A revocable living trust, once established, meant that while I was alive and competent, I controlled everything: the house, the savings, all of it. I could change it whenever I wished, but it also meant that upon my death, or if I ever became incapacitated, the assets would pass not through my will but directly through the trust, to whoever I named as beneficiaries, and that this would happen without probate, without a public record, and without any involvement from people I had not chosen to involve. It also meant that if someone were to pressure me into signing a deed of sale, the trust had specific provisions about what could and could not be done with trust assets. I named my grandsons as primary beneficiaries. Trish was listed, but in a structure that Carol described carefully, and that I chose with precision. Then I called Dale and told him I had decided to cooperate. He came the next day without Trish. I thought that was interesting. He sat in the chair across from me in the living room, the good chair, Gerald's chair, and he had his folder and his organized manner, and he talked for a while about the process and the timeline, and the agent he had already spoken to his friend. Again, and I let him talk. "I just need you to sign the listing agreement," he said, sliding the paper toward me. I had already had Carol review a version of this agreement. I knew what it said. I signed it. He looked at the signature. Some of the organized manner left his face, replaced by satisfaction, the kind that doesn't know yet that Trish will be pleased, he said. "I hope so," I said. He left. I made tea and sat on the back porch in the afternoon light and looked at the rose bushes, which were just beginning to show their first red. The offer came in 5 weeks. It was a good offer, more than Dale had projected, and this seemed to make him happier than anything. The way being right about numbers always made him happiest. The closing was scheduled. The notary was arranged a woman named Beverly, whom I had requested specifically, having met her through Carol's office. Trish called me the night before. For the first time in months, she sounded like herself, a little nervous, a little hopeful. Younger somehow. She said she was glad I was being open to this. She said that Clearwater Gardens had a quilting group and that she'd already reserved me a room on the garden side. I said thank you. I said I would see her tomorrow. I lay in bed that night in the room where Gerald and I had slept for 31 years, and I listened to the house the way you listen to something you know well. The particular creak of the hallway, the way the heat moved through the pipes, the small, reliable sounds of a place that had been home long enough to have a voice. I was not sentimental about it in a drowning way. I simply wanted to hear it once more in the dark, before tomorrow. The buyer arrived with his agent at 2 o'clock. He was a young man, pleasant, with the specific excitement of someone purchasing their first real property. He shook my hand. He looked around the living room with open appreciation. I did not dislike him. None of this was his doing. Dale stood near the window, in the same position he had stood in the very first time he had come. To look at my yard and see something he wanted to change. Trish sat at the kitchen table. She looked tired. I thought she probably was. Beverly, the notary, opened her folder. She began with the standard documents, the ones the buyer and his agent expected. Then she reached the section that Carol had prepared. And she looked up. "I need to review the ownership structure of this property before we proceed," she said, in the professionally neutral tone of someone who has done this before and intends to do it correctly. The property was transferred into a revocable living trust 14 weeks ago. The trust document contains a conditional provision regarding sale proceeds. The buyer's agent leaned forward. Dale turned from the window. Beverly explained it carefully, the way Carol had explained it to me 3 times until I could have explained it myself. The house was in the trust. I had the right to sell it. I had exercised that right, but the net proceeds of the sale, per the trust document, were designated as follows: a portion to an account in my name only, structured as an irrevocable annuity that would provide me income for the rest of my life. The remainder, the larger remainder, had been designated to an educational trust for my 2 grandsons, administered not by their parents but by a trustee I had selected. There was no provision for a lump sum to be released to any other party. Dale said something. I don't remember exactly what it was. It was the kind of thing people say when they have been certain of an outcome, and the outcome has changed. Trish did not say anything. She looked at her hands. The buyer, to his great credit, said nothing about any of this. He signed his documents. Beverly notarized them. I signed what I needed to sign. The house was sold. Dale left before the closing was complete. Trish remained. When Beverly had gathered her folders and the buyer's agent had made his calls, and the room was quiet, Trish and I sat across from each other at the kitchen table. One final time. She said, "You could have told me. You had made your decision," I said. "I made mine." She looked around the kitchen, the hook with the dish towel, the window above the sink. the small square of afternoon light that fell the same way every October day for 31 years. "Where will you go?" she said. "I have a place," I said. She left. I sat alone in the kitchen until the light changed, and then I got up and I wiped down the counters the way I always had, because some habits are worth keeping even at the end of things, and then I picked up my bag and I walked out. I had found the apartment in September, before any of this was finished. Rosalie had helped me look. It was smaller than the house, naturally, but it had good windows and a small balcony, and it was 4 blocks from the public library, which mattered to me in a way I could not entirely explain to someone who hadn't spent 34 years with their hands in books. Helen came over the first evening, and we had dinner at my small table, and she said it felt like me, which is the best thing anyone can say about a place. Rosalie came the second evening. We opened a bottle of wine I had been saving, one Gerald had bought on one of our lake trips, and which I had kept without quite knowing what I was keeping it for. The annuity arrives on the 15th of every month. It is not extravagant. It is enough, and more than enough. And it is mine and only mine. And no one can make it into anyone else's capital. My grandsons will go to college. I decided that in Carol's office at the second meeting, looking at the language in the trust document, thinking about my 7-year-old who still asked me to read to him, I thought about what Gerald would have said. He would have said he knew. He would have said it even if he was just agreeing with me, and I would have loved him for it. I planted a rosebush on the balcony. A red one, from a cutting. It is small, and it is not quite right for a pot, technically, but it is managing. It put out 3 blossoms this spring, and I stood on the balcony in the morning light and looked at them for a long time. I had always meant to travel, and always found a reason not to. Gerald had been the same way. There was always the school year, always a reason, always later. I booked a trip to the coast of Maine for June. 2 weeks. A small inn that someone on an online forum had said was the kind of place that made you understand what quiet was for. I am going alone, which is not the same as going lonely, though it took me some time to learn the difference. There is a quilting group at the library on Thursday afternoons. I went once. The women there are various ages and various temperaments, and one of them, a retired nurse named Sylvia, has opinions about binding techniques that are, frankly, probably correct. I like her. I do not know what Trish and Dale are doing. I know they bought the house, because Rosalie mentioned it, and I know the school district is excellent, because it was always excellent. And I know my grandsons are growing in the quick, relentless way that children grow. And I will see them, because I am their grandmother, and that is not contingent on anything their parents decide. I read in the evenings. I cook when I feel like it. I have my good windows and my small balcony and my rosebush, and the library is 4 blocks away, and on the 15th the annuity arrives, and the apartment is mine, and quiet, and exactly the right size for a person who knows what she needs. Gerald would have said he knew. I think he did.